Call the August 26, 2019 work session of the Portsmouth City Council to order. Madam Clerk, call the roll, please.
Yes. Mr. Battle?
Here.
Mr. Clark?
Here.
Mr. Glover?
Here.
Vice Mayor Lucasberg? Mr. Moody?
Here.
Ms. Simmons?
Here.
Mayor Rowe?
Here. I am asking everybody in the room to please silence your phone. And if you feel the need to talk, please go outside to do so. We'll have our closed session first and get that out of the way. Is there a motion to go into closed session?
I move to go into closed meeting pursuant to Virginia Code subsection 2.23711A-19 for the purpose of discussing vulnerability assessments, information not lawfully available to the public regarding specific cybersecurity threats or vulnerabilities, and security plans and measures related to the city's facilities, building structures, and information technology system, which would be subject to the exclusion from public disclosure in subsection 14 of Virginia Code, section 2.23705.2, and where discussion in an open meeting would jeopardize safety and security.
Second.
We have a motion that's been duly made and seconded. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Yes, sir. Mr. Battle?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Glover?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Lucasberg? Mr. Moody?
Yes.
Ms. Simmons?
Yes.
Mayor Rowe?
Yes, we're in closed session.
Mr. Battle?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Glover?
Yes.
Mrs. Lucasberg? Mr. Moody?
Yes.
Ms. Simmons?
Yes.
Mayor Rowe?
Yes. And we'll take just a moment for everybody to get settled again. All right, Dr. Pat.
Yes, Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of City Council. During the February 2018 retreat, City Council adopted the Crawford Gateway Revitalization Plan that is aligned with the City Council vision to provide access to the waterfront and reinvigorate downtown with substantial economic development. Following this adoption, the city manager received an unsolicited proposal to relocate and build a new city hall and police and public safety building. Tonight, Mr. Robert Moore, Director of Economic Development, will provide background information and an update regarding the PPEA, including the next steps in the process. This evening, Mrs. Sherry Neal, Intergovernmental Affairs Manager, will present the proposed 2020 state and federal legislative initiatives for your consideration. The 2020 Virginia General Assembly begins Wednesday, January the 8th, 2020. This is the long 8-week session, also known as the budget session, when the sitting governor introduces his biennium budget. The second session of the 116th Congress begins on January the 3rd. The final presentation this evening is the Regional Broadband Authority formation presented by Mr. Daniel Jones, Chief Information Officer. This presentation will provide a holistic view of the regional authority, current effort, statewide broadband authorities, and the next steps for the South Side cities. This was a request from Council at our last meeting, and this broadband authority presentation is coming forward tonight. We will begin with Mr. Robert Moore.
Thank you, Dr. Patton, Mayor, members of City Council. Good evening. Tonight, I will provide an update on staff's review, as Dr. Patton stated, on staff's review of the unsolicited proposal that was received by Amada Hoffler in regards to the PPEA process, where we are in that process, and then discuss next steps for us to continue to move forward. Now, before we get started, I'd really like to go through a timeline of the PPEA process as it has been. As Dr. Patton stated, February 2018, at your retreat, you all adopted the Crawford Gateway Revitalization Plan. Subsequently, and that plan really called for us to focus on re-energizing the waterfront and really reconnecting that with our citizenry and making sure that we utilize economic development to bring that back up to speed. Subsequently, in May of 2018, the city manager received an unsolicited proposal from Amada Hoffler. That proposal included a 100,000 square foot facility that was a combined city hall and public safety building. And it also included a 670, roughly 700 space parking garage. Between May of 2018 and November of 2018, we then went through we began the PPEA process through procurement with the necessary advertisements and so forth. But in November of 2018, City Council approved for the city manager to sign the MOU, or the Memorandum of Understanding, with Amada Hoffler to move forward with the opportunity to analyze such a project. At that time, Dr. Patton did assign city staff to review the proposal and come back with our findings. From November of 2018 to really about March of 2019, city staff went through the process of having needs assessments done and conducted by Clark Nexon and Kimley Horn in conjunction with this project to understand what the needs of each department, as well as the fire and police, what those needs were for a building or for a new facility, as well as the design for a new parking garage. From March of 2019 to now, staff has been, team of staff members has been conducting bi-weekly meetings with Amada Hoffler, Clark Nexon, as well as Kimley Horn to really assess those needs, where we are, and to come up with options for this type of project. And that leads us to tonight. Tonight, we are here in front of you to request some approvals so that we can continue to move forward and really assess this project. First, City Hall. To orient you, the City Hall project calls for the relocation of 801 Water as well as 801 Crawford. That we are actually conducting right now and proposing that the City Hall complex be moved to or relocated to the current County Street garage location. And I'm gonna back up just a little bit. As we were doing our due diligence as a staff and working with the developers, it was determined that City Hall and Public Safety should not be in the same building. They should be in separate locations. City Hall should continue to be downtown. The Public Safety building should actually be located, probably more centrally located in the city. Again, around maybe that mid-city type of area, or mid-town area as you would call it. So looking at and using that purview, we move forward, sitting down again with Amada Hoffler and kind of ironing out some of the details, as many as we could. Again, City Hall itself would be located at the proposed County Street garage. That garage will be torn down, and essentially we'd have two options. The first option would be to take the parking garage location and split it into two facilities. One would be the parking garage, as you see on your right, with about 750 spaces. And then across what would be the pedestrian access of Middle Street, you would have a 68,000 square foot City Hall. As you can see, the existing plaza that is adjacent to the Children's Museum, that pedestrian access would continue, opening up Middle Street, again, to be pedestrian-only access, all the way to County Street. That concept holds true for both options. So again, option A, separate parking garage, separate City Hall. Option B calls for a similar concept as we have right now, which would be City Hall on top of a parking garage. But that would also provide for future development or an opportunity for another site directly across, again, that pedestrian access. Both of these options have pros and cons. When you look at option A, you have two standalone structures. You have a plaza, as you can see there, that is a defined plaza where individuals can congregate, individuals can meet from a pedestrian standpoint. Nice walkway, pedestrian area, and more secure entry. The building also calls for a potential connection across the second floor of both the City Hall and the parking garage. Option B, on the other hand, City Hall is not as prominent because it's sitting on top of a parking garage, so it's not a standalone building. Still have that connection. You would have an opportunity for future development across the street, if you will. However, at some point, you would have to address the parking for that future development. So there would be a need for potentially some additional parking. And the cost to put City Hall on top of a parking garage would be more. Based off those pros and cons, the selected layout or recommended layout is option A. Again, separate parking garage, separate City Hall building, with a conceptual perspective such as this. Again, as you can see, the pedestrian access, the designated views there, City Hall stands by itself. It's a prominent building. And we've gone to the extent of working with the developers to really come up with some conceptual layouts, both external and internal. From an internal standpoint, we've really put some thought into how the floors should be laid out. Not exactly where each individual department would go, but how the floors would lay out. One thing that we kind of come to a consensus is that council chambers, for example, would be on the first floor. Council work session would be on the first floor. The public options, the public uses, whether you're paying your city taxes or whether you're speaking to the Commissioner of Revenue, or if you want to go to Chartway Federal Credit Union, which is currently on the 5th floor, that would all be on the first floor. You have your lobby and security. Certainly on the 2nd floor, you'd also have another lobby and security because, again, you could potentially have access from the parking garage on the 2nd floor. And you can see the designated workspace areas. And we have also determined that the mayor's office, city manager's office, city clerk, city attorney, those would still stay on the top floor, on the 4th floor in this aspect. We have some conceptual designs. This is just a thought of how this could look, how this could match with the old town look, with the buildings that you have now. Just some conceptual options there. And we think this would match and this would feel. Certainly we will come back to council and reach out to the public for these options, but just want to kind of give you an overview of where we are. And please stop me with any questions. When we talk about...
Hold on.
Question over here, Elizabeth.
I know for many years we've talked about replacing the County Street garage.
Yes.
And how many spaces does that currently have?
1,000.
I would have to check.
It's a
Just
little
over
over
1,000.
1,000 now.
About 1,000 now.
A little over 1,000.
And we've taken into account our planning director as well as our city engineer have sat down and have had extensive meetings with both Clark Nexon and Kimley Horn to make sure we're taking into account all the spaces that we currently have for employees downstairs now, as well as what TCC would need potentially, other surrounding uses would need. Now, when we talk about the redevelopment or relocation of City Hall, we have to also talk about certainly the redevelopment of what we have here now. When we talk about these projects, we really talk about the City Hall building is probably Phase 1A, the public safety building is probably Phase 1B, and then Phase 2 would be the redevelopment of this site. And when I say this site, that currently means 801 Crawford and 801 Waters. Right now, as the market stands, this calls for a mixed-use development of approximately 200 multifamily units, really about 2 to 225, about 8,000 square feet of retail space, as well as a new garage. Right now, it is still in the same footprint, and the layout is similar to City Hall. But once you get into the building, see how everything is working, what needs to be replaced, certainly things will be replaced. But you're looking at a mixed-use development that lays out to a new courtyard, new parking, and really utilizes both sites. Again, that Phase 1B would be a police and fire public safety building. Now, as we talked about having separate locations a separate location for the public safety building. The preliminary concept was to place the building on the west side of Willet Drive. And certainly that has its advantages. But we also looked at, and that was in conjunction with the potential of a new middle school on the east side of Willet Drive. While looking at that option, we also looked at, could we place the public safety building on the east side of Willet Drive? And the thought process there is that if you have the public safety, the fire, police, administration, as well as the hospital adjacent to each other, that sort of makes sense. And then on the other side, what would be west side of Willet, you would have the DAC Center, elementary school, potentially a new middle school,
All on the same side.
all on the same side. Again, conceptual design layouts, just to get your juices flowing and see how things could look at this type of building. That leads us to tonight. We are at a point now where, in order for us to continue to move forward, some approvals from you all, from council, will need to be made. First, we are looking for approval of a reimbursement agreement for the architectural and engineering work from Clark Nexon and Kimley Horn. Now, authorization to reimburse this design work is in the event that the city elects not to proceed with Amada Hoffler for this project. So if we decide not to move forward with City Hall and the public safety building, we'd like to, you're asking that council allows us to reimburse Amada Hoffler, Clark Nexon, and Kimley Horn the sum of $200,000 for design work for City Hall, $275,000 for public safety.
These are the very things that I wanted us to try to avoid, which is an agreement that we're going into with the person, with the entity, and at each step in the agreement, there's cost to the city, no matter what we decide to do.
This is not cool.
My impression was that we would go into this without obligation, but obligation has popped up,
More.
and we're just still negotiating. This says whether we do or we don't, we're gonna have to reimburse these folk. Now, we didn't consent as a body for these folk to do these designs at a cost to us. We never discussed that. And really, I think we are way ahead of ourselves. I think we need to take a deep breath and step back and have someone from Mr. Hoffler's organization come in and go over that contract in its entirety with us. So we won't have these type of situations arising. Now, I know a lot of human projects that we can do with $500,000, and I feel hoodwinked here, and I feel like the citizens are being hoodwinked. So I'm going to respectfully ask that someone from Mr. Hoffler's organization come in and go with the complete contract with the council, not the manager, not the attorney, but the council and the citizens. We're way ahead of ourselves. We're spending money whether we do or we don't. And this is what I tried to avoid. And this is what I thought I was getting until this point. So we need to stop.
Okay. Solomon?
Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of City Council, the recommendation for the reimbursement was such that the city would own the plans should they decide not to go forward. Here, if the city decides further down the line that they don't want to proceed, what has happened in the past in different projects, if you cease that agreement, the plans are intellectual property to the company, and therefore they retain that unless you have an agreement in advance.
But we would need the plans.
We don't have them yet.
Mr. Battle, the assumption is
Assumption.
no, and when I say assumption is if the city decides it does not want to go forward this year, but wants to go forward in a year or two, you have already had the work put in terms of a plan, and so you own the plans for future progress should the council decide. Let me add one other piece. Mayor, Mayor, council members, you all did ask, and I will schedule for next week the
I got you.
discussion with regard to public procurement. And I will simply say, the opportunity for this body to go through that contract with a proposer does not exist in the law. And to
Well,
be
we're not
simplistic
talking about law here. We're talking about showing the citizens of this city, along with the council persons, what we'll be getting in step by step by step. The law, I think, the law can do what it wants, and it has its place at times, but as a representative, we're going to need to see it in its entirety. How can we make the assessment? Are you making the assessment for us?
Let's get Shannon. Shannon has asked for the floor.
But that's not his job, to make the assessment for us.
He's not doing that.
Let's,
I did want to just get one point of clarity. It's my understanding, having dealt with some of this in my life, so the reimbursement agreement for the architectural and engineering work, that's the recommended cost for us to own the work that has already been done. So in essence, if they pull out, like you just said, we own the work that has been done. So if we wanted to go with another developer, we wouldn't have to incur that cost again.
But suppose we don't want that type of
You're going to want it because you're going to.
schematics.
You're going to want it.
We want to do something entirely different. You see what I'm saying? This is tying us into things that we may not be comfortable with, but we'll get to a point where we'll say, oh, well, we put all this money in it. Why don't we just go ahead now? And this is the very thing that I'm trying to keep us from getting dipped with, is cost while we're doing the negotiation, whether we want to or we don't want to. The way the negotiation is designed to pull us in. And again, we might not want to use those designs. Yes, we'll have them, but is that what, suppose someone offers an entirely different deal? So
okay.
don't do that to us.
Let's-
And we need for someone to come in here from that organization and bring that contract and go over it completely. And I don't care what the law says. I'm saying we as council people are not doing our duty if we don't have them to come in and go over this situation in a public session. All of the how it'll look and these number apartments and this and that and the beautiful, that's fine. But there's cost involved with this, and I don't want an albatross around the citizens' neck. And I'm going to say again, I won't vote on any of this until someone comes in here and go over that contract in its entirety with me and the citizens.
Let me ask a question. How many more slides do you have?
That's it.
Hopefully one.
Let's see
It's just
that,
questions.
and that-
It's really just questions.
Then I'm going to ask you to go back to the concept.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, so the next slide is just questions. It's
How many questions?
just questions.
The next is Q&A.
Of which one?
Option one, option two.
Okay.
Well, I think your comments are good. I think it would be wise for us to have, I'll call it a public hearing on these two options. Let's get the public input on, this is a public.
No, Mr. Mayor.
Sir, I've got the
Okay.
floor. I'm not talking about.
You're not understanding what I'm saying.
I understood completely what you said.
But
Well-
that's not what I'm talking about,
I'm
them
not
to look
speaking
at
to
that.
your, I'm speaking to
Me.
everybody on council,
Yes, sir.
not to what you raised.
Yes, sir.
Before we spend a dime of money, I want to hear from the public on, because this is a public building that will be around for at least 50 years and- or longer. And I think it's important for us to know what the public thinks of these two options before we take any further steps on developing a development agreement. And it's really looking at the concept,
Just
and
the concept, that's right.
not the money.
Not at
aspect.
all. We're not there at
You know,
money.
the concept of A versus B versus C versus D is going to drive the money.
Right.
Bill's got the floor.
On the cost, I think the idea of a public hearing is proper and needed. But let's say between the public and council, the design changes. My question is, can it be negotiated that those costs are hard costs? In other words, they can't be added to based on design changes. Everything's negotiable, okay? So that would be my recommendation. You know, that's over $500,000. And I know, I think somebody said that's on work already done on what we're seeing here. But I would say go back to Marta Hoffler.
Go ahead.
And let them know if there are alterations that we don't want any added costs to design architectural work. The other thing is, on the existing Crawford Street parking garage, when we were talking about refurbishing that, it came out that it was not designed where it could be added on. In other words, another floor. My concern would be there come a point in time where we may want to add on to both facilities. So my question would be, is that incorporated in the design that we're seeing here?
Good point. I'm trying to have a balanced conversation, and we operate under Robert's Rules of Order. Before we go to a second person to speak, I want to make sure that everybody who has not had a chance to speak have that opportunity. Elizabeth.
I think I'm clear, and Mr. Ashby, correct me if I'm wrong, please. In the PPEA process, and in the city procurement process, the one thing that can never happen is the city council negotiate a contract with anybody. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So we authorized our professional staff to negotiate a contract. What we are looking at, and what I agree we should ask the public to weigh in on, is location and design concepts. And then we will agree or disagree on what we want to build and what we are willing to spend, and provide that to our staff. Is that kind of the
That's where we are.
layman's way?
There's no money spent yet.
Mayor, if I might.
Okay.
Okay.
You had the floor.
No, I'm good right now.
Okay.
So,
No,
No money.
you are correct. One thing I want to correct, in terms of these sums, there's no work that has been
Right.
done that equates to these sums.
No.
It is the next step in terms of
We're trying to get
moving
permission to
forward.
move.
Yes. Because what you have here are just broad conceptual drawings. These are not architectural engineering drawings, which are labor intensive. Correct. And so that's the purpose of coming in advance to speak to council. But you are quite right. Unlike some boards and some commissions who directly engage in the procurement process, that is not the system designed here, and I can go through that detail when we gather 2 weeks from now.
Yeah.
Shannon.
And to your point, I mean, looking at this, it says conceptual drawing. So I get that, and I understand that it says architectural and engineering reimbursement. So they're asking, once they do the work, they want to be reimbursed for the work that they put in.
Should we decide not to go forward?
Right. Should we decide that? But to the mayor's point, and I agree with the mayor, this is City Hall. This is the citizens' building. And I think that before we move forward, perhaps we get some input from the citizens, and then we can all at least feel that we've done our part in informing everyone, and therefore moving forward with an informed decision.
Certainly.
To pick up on what you just said, this would be a public hearing that would talk about the location of both City Hall and the police station, the public safety building. It would talk about the concept, if it was on this site, which option the public likes best.
Concepts.
And we need that information. I think it's really important that we get this input and we just take a breather on what we're doing and have this public hearing. We could do it at a council meeting. We could pick a night and have it on an off-council meeting, so we had plenty of time to give people. This is, again, an important building. It's just like the courthouse. It's going to be around here for a long time. It carries the identity of the city. And so for those reasons, we need a public hearing. Yes, sir.
Now, all of this is a moot point once we go over, if we go over the proposal and we don't like it. No, we don't negotiate. And really, they didn't negotiate. There was a proposal they were looking at. But regardless of what they ever negotiate, the final buck stops here. And I think it's important that we're gonna know the cost as well as the citizens, the cost of this project. We have schools to support. We have workers to support. We have retirees to support. And I will not give the city's money away and sleep good at night if we're throwing money down the drain, or we could get a much better deal somewhere else. I'm talking about cost. I'm not talking about beauty. I'm not talking about which one they want. I'm talking about cost here.
I think you're right on. Your points are good. We may hear that no one likes these sites at all, and so we're dealing with a totally different set of costs. And it came to me, maybe we ought to have this public hearing on a Monday night, one of our regular scheduled meetings, instead of having a work session, and start that public hearing at a hour that makes sense, like 6:30 or 7. I think the earlier the better. Make this a single purpose to hear from the public on the notion of a new city hall and public safety building. How quickly can we have that public hearing?
Paul, you want Mr. Mayor, it's important that the citizens know the cost as well as we know the cost of this operation. So when there's the school board asking for money, the retirees asking for money, we can give them a reason why, because this is what they chose. If they choose this, but they have to know the cost.
You're so right, Paul, and I think that we need the citizens' input on whether or not they think that City Hall should be in these locations. If it's not this location, then it could be a totally different set of costs. And so we're kind of like at the intersection. Do you go left, do you go right? And I think it's really important at this juncture that we get the input from the citizens. Have another public hearing when we get the cost. I think that this is a process that needs to have.
Yes, see, I really don't care whether it's on the moon. All I want is the citizens and for us to know the cost of what this project is about.
I don't think that anybody on city council disagrees with
And
you.
I didn't say that. I believe you. I can tell from the way you've been carrying the meeting that you're concerned as well.
Dr. Matt?
The last bullet on the next steps, Mayor, Vice Mayor, Mayor, and members of council, is project feasibility analysis, which includes the financials that we do not have, the location, which we have shared in this presentation. That has to be determined, as the mayor and you all have indicated. As we did with the Crawford Bay revitalization plan, after your retreat, we hosted 2 meetings, which were the presentation of, we advertised it, the presentation of what we're presenting tonight. But when we come to present this next week or week after, whenever we set, we will not have financials at that point. We've not spent a dime as it pertains to the design or any of this for this project. We're right here. We would like for you all to say, as you've said, present this to the public. This remains. Once that's presented, there's discussion and decision. Then you all will give us the go-ahead to move to these parts that we'd like to go to.
Our next Monday meeting is this 9th of September at 6. Can we work, do we have a consensus to convert that to a work session, to a public hearing on the steps up into the cost?
Okay. What are you looking at?
And because, yes, sir.
Were we given a proposal by this company?
It's a PPEA, and it has been received by the procurement officer. The
Was it a
proposal doesn't.
proposal?
It's a PPEA, yes.
Is that a proposal?
Yes.
Oh. Were there any figures involved with this proposal?
I cannot answer that, Mr.
Well, I skimmed it, and I know, and you're representing us, you should know.
I don't know the figures.
I didn't say that. I said, actually, were there figures involved with the proposal?
Yes, I'm sure that there
Oh, well,
are.
that's what I asked.
I'm sure that, but it's not the figures that will give us the cost of this building.
I'm saying the proposal period has cost that it has in it before we even get the rest of it.
No. You want,
All right. Can we set our September the 9th meeting as a public hearing in the council chamber at 6:30? That will allow people who get off at 5 to get home, make any arrangements to come downtown.
Can you advertise it? Yes.
It depends. If we need 2 advertisement, we're going to have to move it to the.
Well,
It's not a required,
It's not
not
required.
it's not a required public hearing.
yeah, it's just of letting this
It's not a
be.
statutory public hearing, but, so you would need 3 days, Mayor.
Yeah. This will be the first, if we can get consensus on council to have it, this will be the first announcement.
Be the first step in.
I'd say yes to that.
Yes. Yes.
Oh,
You didn't
Yes.
understand.
Yes.
okay. Yes, so it's unanimous. We'll have a public hearing at 6:30 on the 9th of September in the council chambers on this.
This is what will be presented. Okay.
This will be the only thing on the agenda for that evening. Yes, sir.
And Mayor, could I just add a couple of things in that offering? If we could make clear, put some clear caveats in there that this is conceptual.
Conceptual.
This is conceptual. This is not anything that we've signed on to. It's conceptual, and it's an opportunity for people to come review that as the concept is stated, because I don't want us to get real
And we,
confused.
and I want the public to know that we sincerely want their input on it.
Absolutely.
We want to know what they think.
But, Mr. Mayor, I want their input on the proposal.
Sure.
That's just a little tiny piece of the proposal. We need for them for us to go over exactly what the proposal was that came into us. And that's all I'm saying, and
And they will be able to do that. We can hear comments on that.
No, you
right.
ask your question.
Okay. So is there going to be someone here to go over that proposal?
No, this is a public hearing for the public to tell us what,
But they can't tell us if they don't know what the proposal is. Now, if you're talking about this incident here, that's, like I said, that's just one minor, minuscule part of the contract. I'm saying for them to be aware of the complete situation that they are committing to.
We don't know it yet.
You see what I'm saying? Because a lot of times we sit here, and the greatest resource, let me say, it's the greatest resource we have is our human resource. And a lot of times we don't like to give our human resources, and I be scratching my head because we'll give and go into other things cumbersomely, and when we get to the human resource, we're like this. And we continue to suffer with this. So
okay.
I'm just trying to make sure we make the best possible choices with the money so we can take care of our human resources.
Bill asked for the floor, then Elizabeth.
Well, I think as it's been stated, the public input at this point is on the conceptual
That's all.
design, but also the location.
Yes, there are two
That's-
pieces.
That's extremely important.
Yes.
And also, this project will have further public hearings
Yes.
along the way. I
Yes.
think that's important to realize.
Yes.
They will.
So there'll be probably many public hearings reference this project.
This is a long
In my-
process.
I'll get to you.
Yes, sir.
Elizabeth has got her hand up.
Yes, sir.
But all upon Bill, the proposal has been in the public domain, and so it's a public document, and we can hear comments that night on that document to the extent that the
They will
document
make-
exists today.
I have a different question altogether. I think I know I said to Dr. Patton early on, I was not happy with the public safety building being on the west side of Willet Hall. I much prefer the east side of Willet Hall. That makes a lot more sense to me. And it's, even though it's just the other side of the street, it's away from the neighborhood. It's more connected to the big industrial Maryview Hospital building. But I know at different times we've talked about areas around the regional jail and more out Victory Way, other more midtown areas. Have we eliminated all those other sites? Is that what I take from this? For the public safety building I'm talking about now.
The final, both the fire and police looking at the best location for in proximity to getting to wherever they need to do was in that midtown area.
That was their choice.
That is their choice.
That was my question.
Sure.
All right, well, I think we've got a course for the next meeting.
Yes, sir.
Yes, good. Yes, sir.
My colleagues seem to put the cost
We are not ready.
and we erred when we didn't go over this proposal with the public. Maybe we had a public hearing and documented in the newspaper, but such a project as this has to be gone over with the citizenry, like, very extensively.
Yes, yes.
Because again,
Yes.
something like this will cause us not to be able to finance our schools, or to say no to the police raises, or to have the folk that work with the city not be up to par with everybody else. So they needed to know intensively what they're getting into with this.
So we need to.
Not just a shake by the night sort of thing.
Thank you.
You
All
ready?
right, let's go to item 2.
All right, Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of City Council, we're going to ask Mrs. Sherry Neal, our Intergovernmental Affairs Manager, to come forward with the FY 2020 state and federal proposed legislative initiatives.
Good evening, Mayor, members of City Council. Thank you, Dr. Patton. So this evening, as promised a couple of months ago, I'm coming before you with draft legislative initiatives for the upcoming General Assembly and the federal government. And so this is, I'm going to share with you some 2020 state legislative initiatives, state policy support, public policy support positions, supporting the opposition. And then we'll look at the 2020 federal legislative initiatives and then the federal policy support or opposed positions for public policies, and then into the next steps. So the first state legislative initiative we're proposing is to amend and reenact the section of the code dealing with unwanted telephone solicitation calls, such as they call it spoofing, and there's some other terms for it. Technology has gotten so these days that they can use phone numbers that look familiar to you, or they can say that the phone number look like it's coming from a federal agency like Social Security, but it's really not. So our code section has not been updated since 2004 that deals with dealing with telemarketers and misleading telephone calls and things of that nature. Our Attorney General has been working with several other states for some time to try to compel the FCC to stop these types of calls. One of the states that they have been working with is North Carolina. North Carolina actually passed legislation this month and to deal with this particular problem, putting fines on it as well. So what we're suggesting here is that our state legislature look at what North Carolina just did and include it in our legislative, in our state code. Our next one is to amend and reenact, repeal these sections of the code dealing with felony drug distributions for convictions and eligibility for TANF. You may recall that this was one of our initiatives from the last General Assembly session, and it was carried by Senator Locke and Delegate James. We fought a really terrific battle on this one, and our Director of Social Services, Ms. Littlehill, came and she did a yeoman's job with this. Unfortunately, due to the politics of the day, we weren't able to get it through. We pretty think that things are going to change politically after November, and also we're looking at streamlining this particular request so that it's not as broad for any felony drug convictions, but we would make it for felony marijuana drug convictions, since marijuana now is not as seen as as dangerous as the opioids and things that are still out there now. We're thinking it may have a better chance of getting through at that point. The whole thing about TANF is Virginia, and you may not recall, Virginia is one of 9 or 10 states that still have a full ban on TANF. That's it. A lot of them have already changed it, they've modified it or whatever. So we're looking for a modified ban at this point in time, which would only allow TANF for felony marijuana drug convictions. They already allow SNAP for these particular convictions if it's not a felony. And there's some parameters set around it. You have to go to drug treatment courts. You got to do different things in order to get the SNAP. The benefit of TANF is that you get a small monetary stipend every month. But we found out when we were fighting this up in Richmond earlier this year is that TANF also allows them to get other services like workforce development, workforce placement, dental treatments, dental care, things of that nature. So that was that particular one.
Before you move off of that, so you could have a felony conviction for, let's say, break-in.
Yes, sir.
But if it was a felony conviction for some drug offense other than marijuana, you'd be out of the game.
Yes.
I don't think that we should make this a beauty contest between which felony arises to the point where you can get food stamps. We're talking about people who have served their time, re-entered into society. Why discriminate? I think the position that, and I'm saying this to my colleagues, I think the position that we had last year is the better position.
Council is in full agreement. We totally agree. I mean, the way that the law currently stands, you could be a murderer, you could be a rapist, you can be a pedophile, you can be convicted for pedophilia, anything else in the world, and you can get TANF. You just can't get it for a drug conviction.
Yeah, that makes no sense.
And that's what we were fighting this year, but we're willing to go back and take it back up again.
Am I hearing a consensus that we leave it like this?
Yes. Okay.
Okay, will do, thank you. The next item for your consideration. This is a pilot demonstration program for emergency shelters upgrade assistance. Recently, Old Dominion University conducted a study on the impact of hurricanes in Hampton Roads. And as you may recall, last year, we had a big threat about Hurricane Florence almost coming directly at us.
Right.
Unfortunately for us, it veered. Unfortunately for our neighbors in North Carolina, it did not. Just quickly, in this report that they did, they say that the total impact of the hurricane, similar to 2018 Florence or 2005 Katrina striking Hampton Roads, could approach or even exceed $40 billion in the first year after the landfall, equating to 40% of the Hampton Roads gross domestic product and nearly 10% of Virginia's GDP. And then the report also goes on to say that in addition to the wind and water damage approaching $20 billion, the disruption in life in Hampton Roads in the first year after the hurricane would result in a storm toll more than doubling in cost. The report estimates the loss of 175,000 jobs and a decline in economic activity of nearly $23 billion in infrastructure and military installations suffered significant damage. So what we're asking here is that most of the buildings in Hampton Roads that are used for shelters are schools. And a lot of our schools are 50 years old or older. Some of them they may not be ADA compliant. The federal government is now requiring that at least one shelter be for pets. So that has to be taken care of. We've got 2 shelters that we're using right now that is in need of updating to include wiring upgrades and generators. So the suggestion here is that the state create a pilot program that will provide localities such as ours some funding assistance in order to actually bring our shelters up to some sort of speed so that we can try to help our citizens in a time of need.
Yeah, that's a no-brainer.
Keep going.
This next one is a carryover from 2019. This was also in our legislative package, dealing with fishing expeditions for public employees' personal identifiable information. Our patron for this one was Delegate Heretic. This bill almost died in subcommittee. We were able to salvage it at the last minute by asking for a letter to be sent to the FOIA Commission to have them study it. We were successful in getting that letter. Since that time, the subcommittee has held 2 subcommittee meetings. And again, I said this morning, and I'll say it again in front of you, I'm very grateful to our city attorney and our chief IT director, Mr. Jones. They have done a yeoman's job in bringing this whole thing forward to the state, to the point that the FOIA subcommittee has agreed that there's a big problem here, that they're going to go before the full committee on the 18th of September to ask to have the study extended for a year so that they can get their arms wrapped around it properly. And there may be some subsequent legislation that'll come out for the 2020 legislative period that would deal with the citizens having their information wrapped up into a FOIA request due to the fact that they may have reached out to a local government for whatever, cutting grass or something, and then there's a FOIA request made about people who have asked about cutting grass, and then their information is all swept in as well. So this is really huge. We never thought we would get that far. This was really huge.
Well, what's the ask here?
This is just to continue to support whatever recommendations come out of the subcommittee. So the next one, I'm sorry.
Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of City Council, with Ms. Neal's guidance and experience, we did provide several proposals to the FOIA Council. They, of course, we provided some initial proposals. They have modified them and structured them in such a fashion to move those issues forward, both for the entire FOIA Council as well as the carryover, as Ms. Neal has said. But some of the issues surrounding that and the staff and the city's concern, of course, is to make sure we are not doing anything that makes it easier for the city to be subject to the type of incidents that are happening in Texas, that we're not providing information in such a fashion that we essentially assist someone in a nefarious act in terms of easily being able to essentially test the whole city population, or for that matter, to protect the citizens. As Ms. Neal said, where we think the FOIA Council is going to start is to make sure that if Solomon Ashby sends an email about his grass cutting in his neighborhood, while you might have my name, that doesn't necessarily mean I intend for any FOIA requester to have my address or my email address or my phone number. You simply know who made that type of request. So those are the tensions everyone is dealing with. And Ms. Neal is being generous. It has been an issue that resonated with the entire FOIA Fishing Subcommittee, when at least I had some concerns as to whether or not we would get a one-shot deal and be dismissed. So that's the road we're traveling. They are modifying some of the requests, but they are taking it in large chunks and really considering data release on behalf of cities and municipalities.
And just to add to that, while initially some folks tried to make it seem like it was just a Portsmouth issue, we did get past that. And now that is going forward for another year, and speaking with VML and VACO, they are also going to get on board. As a matter of fact, VML has asked that this particular initiative be brought before the Legislative Committee and Roanoke when they meet in November. So and then VACO is going to dovetail off of whatever VML does.
Very good.
This next initiative, and I'm trying to explain it, this is really out of my bailiwick. 2013, there was some legislation passed by Senator Hanger in the General Assembly where they requested that the Stormwater Control Act, the Erosion and Storm Control Act, and the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act be looked at, and any redundancies that's within these particular acts be removed, so that it would make it more easier for those localities that have to enforce these particular regulations or administer them, so to speak, and the people who are the developers or whatever, to make it more of a one-stop shopping for those being regulated. What happened after 2013, because first of all, Department of Conservation and Recreation was supposed to have been charged to doing this in 2013. General Assembly came back the next year, and they said they passed legislation that moved these programs from DCR over to Department of Environmental Quality, DEQ. Then they came back 2016 and they passed some more legislation that basically just looked at the erosion and said, no, they did an opt-out, a local opt-out for those localities that do not have an MS4 permit, or they don't have that kind of charge. So because then they put together a regulatory advisory panel, the RAP, to look at these acts. So what this RAP is doing right now, they're only going back as far as the 2016. They didn't go all the way back to the first one, so they're only concentrating on the erosion and soil and the stormwater management. So, but they're still leaving out the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act, which is causing problems to localities such as ours because of the overlay, and there's the redundancy, and there's some confusion in there. This is not a slight to DEQ. The DEQ recently sent a long missive to the governor talking about how much money they have lost. They have been cut so many times. They've been cutting funding, they've been cutting personnel. They really don't have the ability to do a lot of what they really need to do. So what we're asking in this particular act is to have a budget amendment to allow DEQ to hire consultants in order to actually do what the 2013 legislation asked in the first place. Questions? Okay. And these are the budget amendments that we're looking for. The first one is the shelter upgrade program, which we spoke to earlier. So we're suggesting maybe $2.5 million in each of the upcoming years of the biennium for that particular grant fund. The DEQ, which I just spoke of, with about $135,000, we think should be sufficient for a consultant to do that. And then last but not least, our Children's Museum of Virginia is going to be celebrating their 40th anniversary. We want about $200,000 from the state to help for marketing and promotional awareness in a campaign. We think we have precedence for this because of the amount of money that has been given and continues to be given to the Sports Hall of Fame, which is a non-state agency such as our museum. So we're asking for that as well.
Try to use that in comparison.
Well, I mean,
No,
that's she's here.
I don't think we would use that.
So here we have a list of supported state public policy initiatives, and they're pretty much the same as we've done in the past. K-12 education, of course, increased state funding, cleaning the Chesapeake Bay, more money for that. I'm sorry?
I noticed that you had funding figures of monies you're asking for.
Yes, sir.
Why are they so low? Shouldn't we ask for more? 3-4 times more.
For which one, sir?
Shelter request. Museum, Children's Museum, 4 times more. We can't be afraid to ask.
No, yeah, and I agree. Mayor, City Council, I do agree. We're not afraid to ask. We try to make our requests reasonable
Well, let them.
as much as possible. The first one, you're actually trying to establish a pilot program in the budget that does not exist at this time. We went through that the last 2 years when we were establishing the program that we did finally get through for the host cities of the Port Authority and to help the economic development. And we were able to get only $1 million for that to divide between 5 cities just to get our foot in the budget. We can ask for more, but we need to be realistic at the same time because there are other competing issues.
Will it hamper us from getting in the budget?
Well, what hamper?
The amount we asked for?
No.
It could. Yes, sir.
Or do they just give everybody what they can
No.
give them? Yeah.
No.
No.
No, I'm saying what they can give.
If they're willing to give it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, if they're even willing, because they may not be willing to go forward with this.
But that's for 20 million, that wouldn't mean that they're gonna say, oh, no, we're not gonna give it anything for emergency shelter upgrades. They know we gotta have that.
By the same token, they may look at these figures, and if they like the idea, they may say, well, that's not enough, and then they'll put more into it. So it really could go either way.
We're not adopting this tonight.
No, we're
Take
just
these
discussing.
comments As feedback to you.
Yes, sir.
Right, we've got well until November.
And when I say
Yes,
you,
sir.
I'm talking to you.
Right, keep going.
Okay, so back to the public
Very good
policy. These are supported policies, state public policy initiatives that we have seen before. And then again, for the local stormwater assistance fund, it's a $50 million ask, I believe is what was being asked by Chesapeake Bay Preservation. Right, so that'll be a $50 million support. We're supporting that ask. We also support, let me go down a little, sorry. The bottom one, the restoring reductions for the Community Services Board. Right now, they're scheduled to lose substantial amount of money. And that's because they have this new program that they've been implementing, it's the Medicaid. They figured that Medicaid would be able to pick up the difference. And if Medicaid, the new Medicaid expansion didn't, then the state would go back and relook at what the loss was, the gap was, and they would backfill it. But we're asking, along with Virginia Municipal League, we support the concept that they need to put the money back now and not wait to see what happens with Medicaid expansion.
Maybe go on.
And now for the federal. So, as you know, federal government moves a lot slower than the state government in all manners. And so here what I've done is I've gone through our representatives' legislation, and we have Congressman Scott and two senators, Senator Kane, Senator Warner. And I've just identified a couple of bills that they have submitted to Congress that I thought we could get behind and support. The first one, at this point in time, when a person is in a public institution, an inmate, they lose their Medicaid, and then it becomes a problem for them when they get out to have to go through the whole system to go get it back on again. So what Congressman Scott has put in a bill to say, instead of eliminating their Medicaid, you just suspend it until they get out, and then it can be, yes, sir.
Is that only in the federal system? Because
That's the federal system.
That's the federal.
That's why I was asking, because in the state, they can still get it.
That's right.
If they're in one of our local or regional jails.
Okay.
That's
yeah,
federal.
That's the federal,
Okay.
yeah.
They know, that's federal.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I said that's federal. We are getting it over
Right,
and
so
over.
then, yeah, he also has the Rebuild America Schools Act of 2019, provides for long-term improvement of public school facilities, which we definitely want to get behind, I'm sure. He has the Raise the Minimum Wage Act, which is something that we've talked about here for several legislative sessions. Senator Kane has a Fair and Equal Housing Act of 2019, dealing with persons suffering discrimination on a sexual orientation, gender identity, or other purposes. He also has the Jobs Act, which extends the federal Pell Grant eligibility to short-term job training programs like workforce development, those programs. Streamlining energy efficiency for the schools Act of Senator Warner's, retrofitting and assisting schools, and so that's something that we would definitely support. And I'm going to drop down to 2302, American Transportation and Infrastructure Act. So this bill, we're supporting, we recommend supporting it along with National League of Cities. The bill is authorized in $287 billion from the Highway Trust Fund over the next 5 years to make investments to maintain our roads and our bridges and keep our economy moving. And this might be, support the cancellation of the rescission of unobligated highway contracts authority to take place. So as of July 1st, 2020, the FAST Act is going to go away. That was the first big transportation bill. And what the administration wants to do is they want to pull these funds back. Any funds that haven't been expended, they want to pull them back so they can reappropriate them. So National League of Cities is urging Congress to repeal the rescission, to keep the money in there. And for the projects that are already on the table and that's needed within state and local governments. We also want to oppose this USDA proposed regulation, and this is out of the Trump administration, President Trump administration. Over 500,000 children would no longer be automatically eligible for free school meals under this proposed food stamp program. And what they want to do is they want to change the eligibility for receiving meals in schools for children. And this particular rule is in the Federal Register at this time, and the comment period ends in September 23rd.
Sherry, on Title, is it Title I schools where they qualify for free and reduced lunch? Does that have any implication with that ruling there?
Mayor, I'm not quite sure. I would think that it did.
Can you check
Yeah.
it out?
I will
We can
check
check
it
into
out.
that.
I think it's based on the economic status of the children within the school, because all of
I think you're
Portsmouth
right.
schools get free or reduced lunch except Churchland Elementary. It
Correct.
does not qualify. But I will
And
look
food
into
stamps
it.
is based on your income.
Yeah.
It is, right.
I saw something on the news the other night, something maybe we could look into. I believe it was one of our local jurisdictions, that everybody that went to the schools got
Newport
free
News.
lunch.
Well, that's
And
what they're
so-
proposing, Newport News.
Right,
But that's in the
and they're
millions of
doing that,
dollars.
so, and that's across the board, and that takes away any stigma from anybody from getting reduced. It'd just be nice, level playing field, and everybody could get it. That's something we could look into, because I believe that was part of a grant or something, the way that they were able to do it.
We can look into it.
Yes, sir.
We'll advise the schools to look
Yeah,
into
sure.
it, yes.
Oh, sorry.
You did.
And then the next steps? Yes.
If you have comments, and this is the council, get them to the city manager. So you can get them to us, okay?
One comment, something that I'd like us to support is,
Legislative.
I know last year in legislation, they were trying to add some specific cancers to the firefighter cancer presumption. And, we made national recognition for our city when, our city purchased a second set of turnout gear for our firefighters. So obviously, we have acknowledged that cancer is an issue with our firefighters. So I think we should support legislation that adds those presumptions to it. I believe Senator Cosgrove is either putting in legislation or supporting it, and I think we should support it. And I know last year, VML was against it, because I called them and asked them why were they opposed to it. They said, well, we're not opposed to it, we're just recommending no change. So to me, that's opposition. So my issue is we have already taken a step forward trying to protect our individuals, so we should have the same representation for those individuals in Richmond.
All right, we'll look to get that in there.
Anybody in disagreement?
Disagree.
Good.
So we'll add,
All right,
we'll get that in there.
thank you so much.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Now, Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of
Okay.
council, we'll have Mr. Jones to come forward with the Regional Broadband Authority.
Good evening, Mayor, members of council. As you requested the prior work session to come back with you for a briefing regarding just what the Regional Broadband Authority is, what it encompasses, and what are our next steps forward, and what have we done today. So the presentation outline will be the Broadband Authority definition in the Virginia Code and state law that authorizes either regions or municipalities to form an authority, be it a broadband. The current Virginia broadband authorities throughout the state, the municipal and regional authority limitations, so basically what a regional or a municipal authority cannot do even under an authority, a municipal or regional authority benefits, so what are the benefits to an authority, the South Side Network Authority, and that's been the name that is dubbed what the 5 cities is going to be called. Of course, there'll be a name that will be marketed as probably a DBA or something of that nature, but for legal terminology. The formation schedule, and then of course your action items that we're requesting. So the Broadband Authority definition by the Virginia Code, and I'm not going to read it verbatim, but this is what it takes for a municipality or a region to form a broadband authority. So you have to meet these certain qualifications, first and foremost. Be eligible to provide telecommunication services, population in excess of 30,000, qualifying communication service, or enter into public-private partnerships for qualifying communication services. So that's one side of the coin. That's what an authority can do, meaning you have the authority that can be a political subdivision, more or less, that can function. Now, what actually deals with broadband is labeled as the Wireless Service Authorities Act. Now, just because it's called wireless doesn't mean it's strictly wireless only. That was the name that was given to it. Wireless is what is used for both wireless, wired, any type of broadband or communications equipment falls under this act. Constitute full and complete authority to do the acts herein, be liberally construed to effect the proposals.
A coax cable is not considered broadband, or is it?
No. Well, the speed that you deliver across a coax cable is determined by FCC standard as broadband speed, but coax cable service is not technically broadband. Coax cable service, it depends on which way you want to go. So, but coax cable service in the reference of TV cable, no, that is not considered broadband. But carriers use the same infrastructure to distribute both systems, whether it be television or internet.
In other words, you can't regulate cable TV under this.
Correct. No. So here are the current Virginia broadband authorities.
That's what we said when we saw it, Mayor. Look how many.
There's 27. And the closest one to Hampton Roads is Eastern Shore Broadband Authority.
Yep. Is that the whole shore?
Yes. Yeah. And they have, they actually service parts of Portsmouth, Virginia Beach, and Norfolk with wireless service. Virginia Beach City Schools subscribes to their internet connection because there's some schools within Virginia Beach that cannot get broadband internet connectivity. So they broadcast it across the water.
Wow.
Yes.
Now, with them providing that to Virginia Beach schools, then Virginia Beach is paying that authority a fee for such service.
Correct. Just as they would Verizon, Cox, Charter, anybody else.
And one of the things, when I said the same thing you said, Mayor, when Mr. Jones was presenting this, because I thought it was going to be like 5, I knew of maybe 2. And he indicated there are so many because for me to notice, these are very small towns. So when I saw Surrey County, I said, Surrey County. But he says these are small areas across the state that do not have the big carriers that's trying to get in there to provide them any service. So they set up these in order to be that provider.
Right, because when you step back, of course, you have to meet certain regulations. And one, carriers are, we'll say, brand name carriers are only going to come into densely marketed areas where they can see a return on their investment. So without that, then that meets one of the obligations that a county or city must meet, because you cannot have a cable provider currently there providing FCC standards. So if that is there, then a market study has to be done to determine the feasibility if what you're doing is going to influx or damage the competition of that current carrier. And if you do meet that, the municipality cannot sell service below what is currently offered. So if Portsmouth met everything and come in and we wanted to do internet service to the home, this is what ifs, we could still not offer it at a lower price than what citizens currently have. So the first of the limitations, it takes an approval from the SCC, a certificate of need, or a gap statement. So a region or a municipality has to petition the SCC, get a certificate of need or a gap statement to service the end user or the home. That's number one. The telecommunications authorities cannot provide cable service, or often referred to as triple play, phone, internet, and television. So that's strictly prohibited with the Wireless Services Authorities Act. In telecommunication services, prices cannot be subsidized by government entity funds. So the city could not subsidize the cost of that to provide to the citizens. This was all legislation that was enacted in the early 90s that prevented municipalities from interrupting competition or the telecommunications market. I'm sorry, 1998. Said even in Western Virginia, because your first authorities were your Bristol, your Abington, I think Danville maybe, they started it first because they had poor service. And then it came in that they could not provide lit services without an authority governance. So lit services means you're actually passing data, whereas dark services or dark fiber is just infrastructure.
On that first bullet, so the
Yes.
first step would be for the region, even before the localities adopt the ordinances to create the authority to get the certificate of need from SCC? Is
No.
that- No?
Not for the region, because we're not servicing the end user.
Okay.
Because the region is set up as a middle mile.
Got it.
So the benefits is telecommunications legal protections. So if each city wanted to do this, middle mile, end mile, whatever the architecture would be, then that's when the carriers start think that the cities are infringing upon their territory, and you start to get in a gray area. Regional collaboration and interconnection, you start to have all the cities interconnected between sharing data, public safety response, things of that nature. Economic development opportunities, when you say you can be anywhere in Hampton Roads and reach the transatlantic cables, that's huge. That means you don't have to be at the beach.
Right.
Nothing against the beach, but you don't have to be at the beach.
All right.
Wholesale bandwidth pricing. This is our huge driver, because when we can reach a data center and achieve wholesale band pricing, right now we're paying upwards of $2 to $3 a meg. That drops, as I've said before, up to your 40 and 50 cents a meg. So it almost drops off. Of course, as I mentioned, the transatlantic cable landing stations. That is what is going to be one of the market drivers for the area, is when it comes to technology. Right now, there is currently 3 cables that have landed. They're building another landing station, and some forecasts have even called in the next 20 years 18 more cables.
One of the things that has been kind of puzzling to me, Mayor and members of council, as significant as this is to the future of this region, you've heard very little about it, even when they are working out, in the ocean and the world. You've seen very little about it or hear very little about it, other than we as cities meeting. You would think that this would be just a following of in-depth stories about it, of how it's going to just change the whole area, unless I've missed some stories.
It requires work, so the media, they look for the low-hanging fruit, unfortunately.
Thank you. Go on, Mr. Chair.
And as we mentioned, what the regional is trying to do is a middle mile access. This is not in-service. This is middle mile interconnection to lease to facilities, other internet service providers, and to attract business. So business can locate anywhere in Hampton Roads. They can hop on the regional ring and get to the beach. Or for an internet service provider to come into the area, they don't have to build it through each city. They can hop off whichever city they need to go to service their end users. And of course, the ability for public safety and smart transportation, when you're talking about mutual aid or VDOT trying to time all the signals, or you have major accidents or evacuations or whatever it may be, that interconnectivity is crucial. So the Southside Network Authority be comprised of 5 of the 5 Southside cities with a 50-year authority time limit. That's just what it says in the Wireless Services Act, that it's good for 50 years. Who knows what 50 years is going to bring? The authority business model or the middle mile type architecture. So that's what the region, as I said, is trying to achieve. The initial contribution of the $200,000 for the DNA on an 80-20. So as we've done already, the 30% has already been completed, the design and architectural. So this will take it up to an equal contribution from all of the south side cities to go from 30%, the other 70% to 100% complete design and architectural. At that point, then the region and or the authority can put out a bid to see what the construction of this network would look like. Or, I'm sorry, not look like, but what it would cost to build. And of course, what is in the language of the authority is the additional members when we start to expand to the peninsula or we go to the west, the withdrawal of a locality, and the dissolution of the members and what happens to those assets within the authority equally contributed by a certain locality.
Does the name itself kind of say to the peninsula, we don't want you? Plus, Southside Virginia is often referred to as that stretch of road from Cortland to Danville.
But this is not going to be what is marketed. This will just be what is the,
Mayor, members of City Council, I will just say that the meetings that we've had, there have been all sorts of discussions about names, and we've even joked that we can tie this process up for years if we pick or get stuck on a particular name. Some of those, some folks want coastal Virginia or whatever that is.
It's a lot of right.
So there is some understanding that that particular name is for the purposes of moving through the process, and that it will need some sort of marketing. But when you're talking about all the localities, nobody wanted to get tied up just as yet on the name.
Right. And this regional authority is encompassing, as it started, of all HRPDC or 17 localities. South side is phase 1, phase 2 is the peninsula, and phase 3 is the western, or what we call the western part of Hampton Roads, or what, I'm sorry, I call the western part of Hampton Roads.
Okay.
The board term limits for the authority was divvied up. They pulled names out of a hat, or the lawyer did, between 2 and 4 years. Portsmouth was selected to have a 4-year term for their board of directors. And the board representative is 2 locality members from each of the 5 cities, a primary and an alternate. Of course, if the primary is not there, then the alternate fills in. So it's just 1 seat, but 2 people that are appointed to that 1 seat in case one is absent. So the formation schedule, the board members that they need for the advertisement, because all cities have to produce an advertisement in preparation for a public hearing. And as you know, the public hearing, the advertisement has to be out 30 days. So we've kind of sketchily put in the authority public hearing for what we would schedule would be around October the 7th, with a council adoption on the 22nd, and then the authority activation of when it would legally be stood up would be November the 15th. And then,
Elizabeth's got a question.
yes.
Are these board members like you or Dr. Patton or?
What came from
The
the last meeting was that it would be the city manager as the primary and the CIO as the alternate. And then they left that up to, of course, each city, but that was the
initial.
But it's not going
Initial
to be
consensus.
prescribed in the ordinance. It's left up to the governing
Correct,
body.
exactly.
Right.
So we could appoint anybody.
You could appoint anybody you want.
Yeah.
Well, clearly, it needs to be somebody that understands what this is.
You would think so.
Yeah.
Not eligible.
You would think so, but you don't know.
So
Good point.
that's what we're asking for tonight, of who those 2 Portsmouth representatives would be, so that we can pass along, because as I said, each locality has to do the same advertisement, even though it's 5 copies of the same advertisement. so that they can do a public hearing.
You talked about the benefits. Are there any disadvantages to joining?
Disadvantages, Portsmouth is in the center of the regional ring. Without Portsmouth, one, the ring has to be redesigned, and then two, any economic benefit that Portsmouth would reap, we could not get to the transatlantic. That's number one.
Well, what advantages could we potentially get out of acknowledging
Right there.
all?
All of that.
With being part of the regional authority, when we work with to try to either lease or work with economic development opportunities.
Now, what I'm saying is, you were saying that it was an advantage of our location. And without us, that's kind of difficult to put this together.
Correct.
So what advantages can we get out of it as being the hub? Since we're going to be the ball that makes the situation bounce, are there any advantages that we can squeeze out of it? You understand what I'm saying?
Mayor, city council members, perhaps Mr. Jones can speak to a couple of different things. One, Dr. Patton mentioned the reduction in terms of the expense to schools for the same services. There's a reduction in what the city pays for the same services. There's the opportunity to essentially sell services to other providers. Those discussions are going on now. So when you talk about current expenses for telecommunication, even with this construction, I believe we're somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 to 10 years before we wipe out the whole cost and start saving, because we're going to reduce our expense in a short period of time. I will say to you, because I don't know, Mr. Moore's right there. Every company, not every company, I don't want to say that. Companies, when we talk about this ring, it is creating an attraction in and of itself to have access to this ring. For instance, you think about internet speeds, and you talk about how, when we talk about Wall Street and the time and money that's lost in a fraction of a second in terms of communication of a buy or sell order, we now move from the back of the line in terms of speed to the front of the line in terms of speed, both because of the transatlantic and the infrastructure for the city. And so I think you'll see in short order, and the piece that really struck me early on in these discussions more than a year ago, seems like, was the fact that our expenses were going to drop significantly. And then on top of that, you had other folks wanting to look at the city in terms of having access to that infrastructure.
Right, and that steps back to the presentation that you had a week ago, or the prior, with the connectivity study. When you start talking about the local businesses, especially even the military wanting to even just get across the water, or the ports wanting to communicate with all their ports, or businesses wanting to be strategically located within 3 different cities but have interconnectivity without going to the internet and back, they would have a direct connection to them. And that's what the regional ring provides.
Okay.
And what was that cost for our own, just the cities? It was like $700,000 or $800,000.
We are right at, per year, $750,000 to $800,000. That doesn't include what the schools are paying. That is just city, municipal, and that's at a status quo. That means if we never upgrade anything.
It's we're slow. I mean, it's not anywhere where it's going to be.
Other questions? All right, so we're set for a public hearing on this on October 7th.
That's the current schedule. We based it off what the next meeting schedule looks like.
Can you provide us with a draft of the ordinance that you would anticipate that we would adopt?
Yes.
Do we have that
We
at
have
the
that.
next meeting?
Tomorrow's meeting?
No.
Oh, okay.
2 weeks from now.
Okay.
Is that okay with everybody?
Yes.
You need these board members now,
Right,
though.
correct.
But do you need names, or are we just saying the
Position.
CIO and the city manager, or are we saying Dr.
Position.
Altadis?
I think it's positions. What is, it's names.
You need, we need actual names because they're the initial
Oh, it has to
board
be
members.
advertised.
It's got to be published along with the initial composition of the board, meaning the actual live bodies that will be the initial configuration has to be published together with the standing up of the authority.
That's what you're saying.
Mayor, I'd ask for a consensus for
Brand,
our two members to be Dr. Patton and
board,
Mr. Jones.
and I'm I would be the alternate.
That's what I would recommend. I don't mean to be ugly.
Sorry,
that's
but
what
What they're saying is that they need the names to put in the
To put in the
ad.
ad, yeah.
For the,
Yeah.
When is the ad going? 20?
No,
2 weeks before the public hearing, I would bet.
yes.
Please correct me if I'm wrong, the advertisement has to be out there 30 days before the public hearing.
Right.
Paul's asking for more time. What jeopardy does that cause?
They needed to have it
30
like,
days,
they've got it going.
October 7th.
That's why we got the 26th.
Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of City Council, I know at least a handful of the localities have already made those elections. Again, the recommendation of the collective CIOs and representatives was that it be the CIO and the city manager from that perspective, because those folks represent the closest individuals. I believe you all have a meeting tomorrow, also in case of that point, but I would tell you, given the time frame in these large 30-day announcement deadlines, we are almost at the point of not making the deadline for the initial standing up of the authority.
Right.
What was the drop date deadline?
Our meeting is, I believe, the last one in the whole schedule. I think everybody else is before us, Councilman.
You could switch out your board member at any time,
I believe you would have that opportunity.
and we make the appointment, we're the appointing authority.
Correct.
So this could be a placeholder, if not a permanent.
I would say it would not necessarily be permanent. I wouldn't call it a placeholder.
Now, what we're saying is, if we give you the names now, and then 5 days, or at the next meeting, we come up with another name, can we switch it out? That's what he's saying.
What I would recommend is if the council identify folks, perhaps in alignment with the recommendations made by the various cities, if after this organization is stood up, you find somebody who's better capable of providing that, then you do that at the conclusion after we get through the standing up of the organization.
All right, so we have a recommendation from Elizabeth, Daniel, and Dr. Patton. Let's go around the table, Shannon.
Yes.
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 Yes, I assume that yours. All right,
Thank you very much.
thank you. Any other business?
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, sir.
I'd like for you to walk me through bringing to the board the possibility of giving the 5 retirement folk the $600,000+ to, so they will have a $600 stipend.
So you're asking the council consider giving the retirees,
Yes, sir.
all the retirees, or?
No, the ones that we were talking about for the October review, that group, a $600 stipend.
I think that conversation that my colleague is speaking of
That's what
occurred
I
on
need help here.
May the 14th, I believe. There was a consensus to do that. As I recall during that conversation, there was a report back due in October, but that's predicated on
Actuarial.
the $100 COLA to retirees, not the stipend. I think, and I don't want to put words in your
Please
mouth, Battle.
Please, Jesus.
I believe he's referring to the, just the $600 stipend that would be payable to the fire and police retirees, as well as the city retirees not in the VRS system.
Okay, to answer Paul's question directly, we can discuss this tonight, but I think it's, for clarity, wasn't the original request $1,200? And our response is that we were going to look at it in October. And then after the budget came up, a representative from that organization came forward
John
and
Hancock.
said, give me $600 now, or give us $600 now, implying $600 now, $600 in the future, which really kind of preempts the discussion that we would have in October. We asked the city manager to bring back the information necessary so that we could make an informed decision in October.
I don't think that, I don't think the stipend was, there's two parts there. One was the $100 that would be a COLA, if you may, and the other is the stipend.
Okay.
On May the 14th, there was a consensus for the stipend, for the $600 stipend. Then there was a discussion on the $100 COLA, and I believe that conversation, I just looked at the video yesterday, I think that conversation was that the actuarial report is due back in October, and we would address that piece of it at that time.
Ambassador Ford.
Yeah, I recall exactly what the mayor just said. Originally, they were asking for $100 a month, which would be $1,200 a year. And we discussed it and said we would look at it in October when we had the financial numbers back. Then, after that was stated, when they asked for the $600, they said that was half of the $1,200. They said, can we get $600 to hold us over until you look at it in October? Which, to me, you know, that's with the assumption of what's going to happen in October, and we don't know because we don't have the information yet. So that's why the number was 600, because it was exactly half of the 1,200. Because any time in the past when it was done, it was 500. That's why it was very significant when it was 600, because that was half of the 1,200. So, you know, looking at it that way, until we have that information, we don't know what's going to happen in October. So I don't say I can give somebody half of something that may or may not happen in October because we don't have the information yet.
Well, that stipend wasn't going to come out of the pension fund. That was going to come out of the general fund.
And
And that's where people are blurring the line there on what's being asked.
And this is a human resource that we're talking about. And we're talking about $620,000. And I just watched us look at a slide that showed 500,000. Everybody was game. But putting that aside, that's what I would like to do. And I would like for you to, if there's a consensus,
Well,
have that
and I'll-
brought to the board possibly.
Yes, sir. Well, I'm going to try to see where we are tonight. I think part of the discussion, too, ought to be if we've got money to spend on human resources, do we spend it on retirees or active employees? I've heard, well, I think this is a fair question. I had heard that Suffolk is ramping up their recruiting for public safety officers. Is that a true,
Yes,
that they're putting their program on steroids? Good.
Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of City Council. And y'all, I always have my notes for tonight and tomorrow night. I was going to bring this tomorrow night, but I'll bring it tonight.
Okay.
We, city managers and police chiefs, on Friday received heads up from the city of Suffolk as to effective September 1, what they will be putting in place for recruitment of police officers. Effective September 1, 2019, the Suffolk Police Department will be providing $2,400 sign-in bonuses for new recruits and $4,000 sign-in bonuses for lateral officers. That's anybody who's in any police department who wants to leave their city and go and get $4,000.
How much does it cost to put a recruit through training?
For the city of Portsmouth to get a recruit from entering to 18 months is $75,000.
They're a $71,000 saving.
Yes,
That's pretty cool.
which we would have already spent on an officer. Let me go on. Anybody in their department who brings a recruit forward, I'm in the department, but I'm going to bring Mr. Ashby as a new police. Mr. Ashby will get $1,000 for every police that he can bring in. So every city is trying to look at, and no different than Portsmouth. I immediately met with Mrs. Gooden to say, Mrs. Gooden, you need to look at and get to me immediately. Human Resources is currently exploring different options to include reinstituting a one-time retention bonus and possibly establishing a senior or master officer's classification, which would increase compensation. We already have some officers who have resigned.
This is reminiscent of what Virginia Beach did back in the 80s when they said, we're not going to hire rookies, we're going to only hire qualified police officers. And every police department in Hampton Roads suffered because they were raiding the other cities and getting police officers and the chiefs.
Just to piggyback on that, specifically to Suffolk, Suffolk holds a process every month, agility and a written exam for their police department. That's how fast they'll go through people. And I was told yesterday that they were trying to get some people to put applications in now, because if they can get them in now, they can process them fast enough where they will start the academy in November.
But I'm not talking about Suffolk.
We're talking about the impact on our police department right now.
Oh, we've moved on.
No, sir.
No.
What I was saying, I was making a point. If we had extra money to spend on human resources, me, personally, would rather spend it on active employees. And particularly if we have a problem with a threat.
Well, we're going to spend it on both. They're all human resources.
We don't have the money.
Okay?
One more comment I'd like to make, and of course I support the retirees, but as the information that we've got on the retirement fund, I think that $600,000+ would be better spent going towards that retirement fund, because we need to put a lot more money in it in addition to that to get that sound. So that way we need to get that secured up for everybody in the system to make sure it goes through the longevity of the youngest person that's in that system. So I think that would be, put that in there, but we need to put more above that into that fund.
Well, all I'm talking about is through Robert's Rule of Order. If it can be bought, will you bring it up at this time? If not,
Well, I've told you, I'm going to get a consensus.
that's what I'm saying.
Let's find out where we are. Let's
Yes.
make sure that everybody that wants to say something has said something at least once, and then we'll go to the second round of.
No, I don't have any comment.
All right. Now, the question before us that has been put forth is whether or not to pay $600 to firefighters only, to all retirees.
All retirees, the city retirees that are currently in the VRS,
1,077.
and the police and fire retirees.
Not the BRS.
No, no.
Yeah, that's what I said, not.
Oh, we thought you said the BRS.
Not.
Okay.
NOT.
Okay.
Effective immediately. That's the question. All right. Everybody We'll do a nose count here. Elizabeth?
No.
Paul?
Yes.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
No. We're tied, and under Robert's rule, the matter dies. Okay. Anything else? We are adjourned. We'll convene at 5 o'clock tomorrow.